So stay tuned for that. Edie will be in conversation with Shashi Tharoor just a little later in the programme. So as promised, though, we're going to look now at some of the challenges that may lie ahead, because in developed nations, it's fair to say many years' worth of technological transformation have happened in just 12 months as a result of the pandemic. There's been much greater adoption of new technologies to help solve some of the problems posed by the pandemic. But in less developed countries, or those still developing, there has been a huge deficit. That take-up has not been as fast. And so what are the challenges to make sure that all countries benefit from a digital transformation and the digital divide can be narrowed? We've assembled a great panel to talk about some of those issues. Let me introduce you to them. With us is Mohit Joshi from Infosys, Eran Shlomo from DataLoop, Debopama from Citi, and Shilpa Kumar from Omidiyar. Welcome to you all, and we're hoping that Umang Bedi from DailyHunt will join us in just a short while. But in the meantime, let me bring you all in. And Mohit, maybe I could start with you, because I explained some of the challenges there, that the digital adoption has not been universal and there is a huge deficit depending where in the world you live. Just paint a picture a little bit of the challenge that poses.
Sure. So I think, look, I'd begin by looking at the optimistic side, which is the fact that despite the fact that we had a pandemic really of unprecedented proportions, we've really seen nothing like this for at least 100 years. The global economy and civilization has broadly carried on. If you'd asked me in Feb of last year that we were going to be seeing a globally synchronized lockdown, and what do you think are the challenges we'd face? And I'd be talking about food and water shortages and medical supplies. But on the whole, I think economies and societies have really broadly survived through the crisis, and a large part of the credit goes to the fact that the world has become much more digital than we had foreseen. Clearly, the pandemic has also exposed severe gaps, and I think that the gaps such as they exist are really pretty much across the world. You have some elements that I think really need to be put into place before we face the next such crisis. From a digital perspective, I'd say digital identity, especially in India, has really helped. Whether it's direct aid given by governments to households, I think it has helped. This is a program that really should be in place the world over, and digital identity also helps from a credit perspective. So for small and medium businesses, the ability to provide credit, I believe, will be greatly enhanced by having digital identity. Banking has been a huge pillar of support for economies and governments across the world. So expanding on digital banking, making sure that the SMEs really are the backbone of credit revival across the world, I think, is a second theme. We've seen a transition from cash to digital payments, and this will obviously accelerate and again help in the global recovery that we hope to see the world over. And finally, I'd say digital learning, right? Digital learning has been a huge enabler over here in the UK, where many of us are, but even in India, in parts of Asia, in the US. And so, really building those sorts of global platforms to help train millions of people is an opportunity that we should not lose. We've seen some digital learning initiatives really come out and thrive in the crisis, and we should really work to see how we can enhance these platforms and make them more readily available. Finally, we also need to make sure that there is global digital governance. If you take the financial system, for instance, there is a global financial stability board of really the G20 countries that steps in every time there is a financial crisis hitting a part of the world, and so that governments can take synchronized monetary and fiscal policy responses. Uh, and this is not an idea from me. The chairman of BPV has recommended this, that we should really have a digital stability board, right? So that the sort of thorny issues around data privacy, data sharing, data protection, identity, digital IDs for cross-border transactions, that these can be created. So, in a nutshell, I think we have survived the pandemic much better than we would if we weren't as digital as we are today. But equally, we have to take the opportunity and see the shortcomings that the crisis has exposed to really build on the pillars of identity, banking, payments, learning, and a global digital stability board.
Mohit, thank you. And I'm also pleased to say that Bedi is now with us. So Umang, I'll come to you in just a moment, but great to have you on the panel. Debopama, let me bring you in at this point because Mohit there mentioning financial services, access to banking, part of the technological revolution that is taking place. But that is one of the areas where the divide is very apparent, the haves and the have-nots when it comes to technology innovations in banking and finance. Where are you on that scale? And talk to me about how big organizations, including your own, can make sure that that gap is narrowed.
Certainly, and I think Mohit hit upon a lot of the key aspects of what's worked well. Um, what the pandemic has really shown us is that digital is no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. And if some of the studies that we have done at Citi are anything to go by, then what we are looking forward to globally is that digital ecosystems which have emerged could result in a redistribution of about 30% of the world's revenue pools by 2025. That's about 60 trillion US dollars into the digital economy, which means that we are talking about trillions of dollars of payment flows, therefore going through the digital ecosystems. Now, on one hand, that sounds like a great thing, but on the other hand, it could mean that the unbanked and the unconnected or the less connected could be left very far behind unless proactive efforts are made to address this digital divide that Mohit referred to and that you referred to. In addition to sustainable access to broadband, which we know is an issue we all talk about, only about half the world has access to the internet today. There are many other reasons that contribute to the digital divide, and I think Mohit hit upon the right point that the ID divide is another very key one. I think we have progressed a lot in India. In fact, Omidiyar has some wonderful research on digital identity and how that could be very beneficial. But about a billion people, more than a billion people globally today, do not have access to digital identity, and that could be a serious sort of cause of the digital divide. And therefore, it means that we will not be able to carry these people forward for to access to government schemes, to access to banking, to access to financial services, education, and healthcare unless we do something about it. But the good news is that the pandemic has shown that there are things that can be done about it. In fact, there was some research published by GSMA which showed that in a lot of developing markets, whether it's Colombia, whether it's Africa, all over the world, when governments took steps during the pandemic to relax some of the KYC or digital identity rules and regulations, people were able to access government services, they were able to access education, they were able to access financial services. Innovation, which is another thing that can also help with the digital identity divide, as we have seen in platforms like M-Pesa and Kenya, it has really been finding innovative ways to avoid fraud and to create a know your customer digital identification that led to the proliferation of this payment system, which is completely, well embedded today. So there are opportunities and there are way forward. There is a way forward, but I think all of us collectively need to do a lot more to make sure that the bulk of the unconnected do not get left behind.
Yeah, and that very neatly takes me to Shilpa because, look, Shilpa, is investment going into the right places to address that digital divide?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I completely agree that what the COVID moment showed is that a digital world really helped, make even cash transfers in a very complex country like India possible. And the data indeed is that the government could reach at least 80% of those in need with one cash payment. And that's a big thing, to get this kind of inclusion. But if you kind of, flip this around and say, okay, who's being left out? What's being left out? I think that's a more interesting question. If you look at who's left out, I would say the more marginalized people, the more excluded are becoming even more excluded. So if you don't have digital identity, you're homeless. You actually don't get access to any governmental benefits. If you're vulnerable, for instance, young girls, I think the digital world has made it even more vulnerable for them, exposing them to trolling and online stalking. So if I think about who's kind of not quite safe and empowered in this digital world and what we need to do about it, to our minds, maybe there's three things to be done. First of all, the inclusion, the last mile, most difficult mile, needing bespoke solutions. The second is actually a safer online world and also more empowered users. And that's partly an issue for regulation, partly an issue for really education of people who come online. And the third one, and I'm waiting to hear what the next speaker, Eric, has to say, is also in terms of machine learning. How do you make sure that the standards that are being set actually incorporate the voices of the global south and those who might not be at the center stage of making the rules there? If I can quickly flip to what's being excluded, I'll say first level problems are kind of largely been explored: education, financial inclusion to some extent. But if you take the really hard and complex problems, I mean, you take property rights, you take access to justice, these are areas which the digital world has not yet made enough inroads. And to my mind, this is now the next mountain, really, that we need to conquer in our quest for a more equitable and safer digital world.
Yeah, Shilpa almost doing my job for me there and teeing up Eran. Eran, let me welcome you to the panel. And maybe it's worth explaining a little bit about what you do and addressing what Shilpa was saying there about inclusivity and how what you do is vital in that.
Yeah, sure. We're DataLoop. We're very focused on data and have a significant presence in India. And one of the limitations of machine learning is essentially a limitation of you have to have humans behind the scenes. And if you talk about bias, inclusion, all the things that we as human see as ethics, see as the right things, these are all things that behind the scenes are being handled by people that make sure that those machine learning models that don't understand what fair is, don't understand what legal, don't understand ethics, don't understand bias, those are staying fair. And I think with the COVID acceleration, a remarkable thing is now happening here in India. And we at DataLoop, we identify the coming decade as India decade, because India is a very special place on the global economy. And I think this is kind of an opportunity of century, machine learning, AI, presenting an opportunity of century towards India. Because India is a unique place in the world where you have a very effective people who can label or develop data in a cost effective manner. At the same time, with a top global talent of technology, half of the Silicon Valley talent is actually coming from India. And inside India itself, you have a very strong tech ecosystem. And if you connect those two, you get China as well. China has a cost-effective labor and tech talent, but India also has a very open culture to the West and to other nations. And here we are making that call in London, making it in English. That's kind of a part of an evidence of that. And you get these three: the tech talent, the cost effectiveness of labor, and the culture. This present towards India, and of course, COVID accelerating everything. It's like 10x, 10 years X. I think that India gets an opportunity to get once in a century in actually being the power behind driving the fair data, what I call as the fair data development culture. And that, of course, is both financial opportunity, economical opportunity, and for those people who are actually doing that work, career path and growth opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, again, neatly takes us to Umang, doesn't it? Because, look, the Daily Hunt is so important as far as the information deficit would be concerned, the lack of information we know so crucial during the pandemic. And talk to me about the technological solutions to making sure people have access to information and to news as well, Umang.
Thanks, Ben. Firstly, a pleasure to be here, and sorry for being late. I think
No
I
problem.
largely agree with a lot that has been said by everyone. I think for me, when you think about equitability or equality in terms of digital and creating that tech revolution, for me it starts with access, and I think that point has been covered around broadband access. A little bit ago, but I think it's fundamental. It's almost like a fundamental right in terms of having access to information, having access to financial services, having access to healthcare, because there's enough and more data that proves that every time you drive up access and connectivity, it adds to the GDP and the growth of the country, right? I mean, there's enough and more information there. I think it's a fundamental right. The second piece that I'd like to highlight is when you talk about information, there is a massive diversity in India. India is almost like the United States of Europe, and if you couple that across the world, just the diversity in content, language, preferences, you have to have the ability to get content, translate information, meaningful services, citizen services, government services, and news and content information in local languages of that, of a consumer's choice. Because the amount of people that consume the internet in English in India, for instance, is not more than 20% of the total population, right? And so now, how do you make an unbanked economy a banked economy, or an information services economy with healthcare and information services all coming in local languages? So I think the endeavor that we think is important is providing the right set of tools such that everybody has access to information and content and can become a creator. One of our, I'll give you a small recent example. We launched a short video app called Josh that's now become the leading short video app in the country. Just this morning, I read this article about this young kid who'd lost both his legs in the state of Punjab about 5 years ago, and suddenly has turned creator, a dancer, has got a lot of name and recognition around spreading his content, and is actually driving a livelihood and monetization, right? Now, that's of course being able to surface up the right content to the right person at the right level in the right language and the right format of choice. The third thing that I think has been touched upon, but I'd like to go one level deeper on it, is regulation. I think Mohit spoke about it when I had just started, we just came into the meeting. But I think there has to be regulation that's equitable around everything that we're doing with global giants and local players. You've got to create a local playing field, whether it is driving access to that information, technology, down to taxation, down to multiple levels, of information. We can't have different rules for different folks, because if you want to encourage an ecosystem of startups to thrive, you've got to have a level playing field. And I think we have a long way to go globally, by the way. This is not just in India, when you think about that as a level playing field. The last thing that I'd state is when it comes to language and, the whole piece around data is very, very critical. I think AI and machine learning needs to go down and transcend the barriers of of really understanding content and context, because how you present what to whom in a fashion that does not create bubbles and does not create echo chambers is extremely critical, because it can drive and influence opinion in a suitable or an unsuitable way, as we have seen happen in the past. And I think that's another very critical area when you're driving equitability of access, of information, of content, of digital services under a well-regulated umbrella.
Yeah, what has been so wonderful in each of your answers so far on this panel is that you've laid out some of the issues, some of the challenges, some of the problems. Time is tight, but I would like to hear from each of you again. And maybe if I can ask, if you keep your answer to no more than a minute, just to give me a sense of what you are most excited about, the transformation that is coming down the line in your particular field. Give me a sense of what that is, why it is so exciting, and what difference it could make to us. But please, if I can ask you to keep your answers to no more than a minute. Mohit, let me start with you. What will change the way you do your job or the industry that you're working in?
Sure. So look, I think a couple of things. One is, or the first thing is that I'm incredibly optimistic about the shape of the global economy over the next 3 or 4 years, right? I think we're going to go in for a period of secular growth pretty much across the world, across geographies, partly because of the fact that money is cheap, but also because governments have had a very strong fiscal response. So the state of the global economy, the amount of spend in terms of technology and digital, is going to increase dramatically over the next couple of years. I feel that there's also a focus on the green revolution, which we haven't really touched on climate transition, and I think that will be a second set of investments that will boost the global economy. Finally, I think the transformation opportunity for businesses, for countries, for individuals is very significant. There has been a realization that a lot needs to be done from a learning perspective for individuals within companies, within countries. So, taken together, I feel sort of a benign economic environment, lots of growth, new areas for investment because of climate transition, and new avenues and opportunities to learn, I think are going to be making the next 3 years really very positive, I think, globally.
It was more than a minute, but Mohit, I'll let you off. Eran, let me same question to you.
Yeah, so I think in one sentence, it's about people. The AI revolution, the machine learning revolution, is essentially promising a great future for people who actually didn't have tech training. And if you take one company that DataLoop works with is iMerit, and you see the CEO there, Radha Basu, she actually makes sure that people from remote villages are actually coming and getting to participate in this digital changing economy. And I can't stress enough how that important is. And there is big change now happening with India, and it starts with the people. So I think the transition from, uh, I would say, low income labor to more digital tech labor being fueled by this AI and data ecosystem is nothing but the remarkable change coming.
Yeah, and that's such an important message, isn't it, as well? And Debopama at Citigroup, what will change over the next 6, 12 months that, will change how we consider things like financial services, but just the way that we go about our everyday life?
I think the most incredible change is already occurring, that a large part of what we have done in the physical world, we will increasingly do in the digital world. And we won't really think about making a payment because it'll be embedded into what we did. It'll just be it won't be a noticeable process. And I think what gives me sort of inspiration, and I'm mindful of time, is that there's a lot of work going on to carry people along, whether it is examples from countries like Indonesia, where people are spread across 17,000 sort of islands and less access to the internet. And there are organizations like Tokopedia that are working on democratizing commerce and bringing commerce to the doors of merchants who can do business from home and reach millions of customers. Or it is organizations like Grameen in India that are focused on the ground digital education of individuals in the villages by using different innovative models. I think that gives me with a lot of that gives me a lot of optimism that we can make sure that we take people along.
Yes, and Shilpa, as far as investment opportunities are concerned, where will
Yeah.
people be looking, and what is the thing that will change where you start to get excited about?
Yeah. What we're really excited about is using both our dual checkbook, which is really investing in research as well as in entrepreneurs to open up the last mile of difficult sectors. I think complex sectors like, say, the justice sector have seen enormous change driven by COVID. These are fundamental sectors affecting people's lives on a daily basis. And to me, that's really exciting using our dual checkbook to make those changes happen.
Thank you. And Umang, finally to you, what is coming down the line? What can we expect? And I mean, you talk about new developments, new video apps, new access to information. What is the thing that we should be watching right now?
So I'm really energized about several things, but I think the first one for me is the way the pandemic has accelerated digital services across everything, whether it's content, whether it's commerce, whether it's payments, right? And I think that acceleration is just going to get fueled over the next 12 months. The second thing for me is in the next 3 years, we're going to get 1 billion people online in India alone, and really become the largest internet market in the world. And with GDP per capita rising, with the economy growing, as Mohit said, there's going to be secular growth across the board. I think GDP per capita is going to grow, and a lot of non-consumers are going to become consumers. And for me, that's really, really exciting. I think the third thing that's really exciting for me is how this will transform the shape of the economy, and this end of the woods becomes potentially one of the largest internet markets in the world. I think we are 5 to 10 years behind in where China was on the internet, and I think the next 10 years is going to be about this country and this region. And so I'm really excited about that, and for all the entrepreneurs that are going to build great products and services to ride over this wave, and not only serve this end of the woods but the larger globe. And those are the 4 or 5 things that keep me really excited and hopeful about the future.
And on that note, a positive, optimistic note, we will leave it. I'm so grateful to you all for your time, to Mohit, to Eran, to Debopama, to Shilpa, and to Umang. Thank you for being part of the India Global Forum for this year. And remember too, if you're watching wherever in the world you are watching, you can be part of the forum. Remember to use the hashtag FutureNow as part of any social media posting. You can follow the team for updates, highlights, quotes, comments, videos and photos from the event at IGF Updates. Edie is going to be back right after the break with the latest in our global leadership conversations, so stay tuned for that. And of course, remember, she'll also be sitting down with Joshi just a little bit later, so don't go anywhere.